Some stories aren't just told, they're carved into the land, burned into the bones of the plains, and whispered with the wind that sweeps across the open ranges of West Texas. This is one of those stories. The story of a cowboy who wasn't chasing a buckle or a trophy. He was chasing something deeper, a ghost, a legend, and the only beast no man had ever conquered. Caleb Whitaker didn't return to Dusty Creek for glory. He wasn't looking for fame. He came back because the past never let him rest. Everyone in town remembered his father, Jack Whitaker, the great rider who faced the most feared bull in rodeo history, and lost. But legends don't fade away. They haunt. And when Caleb stepped into that arena, he wasn't just chasing victory. He was stepping into the shadow of the man he had loved, feared, and buried. This wasn't just another ride. It was reckoning. And at the center of it all stood Black Thunder, the devil bull, the beast that took his father's life. No cowboy had ever lasted the full 8 seconds on him. Caleb was about to find out if fate had already written his end, or if he had the courage to write a new one. Hello my friends, I'm Roger, your storyteller from the Country Life Rural Stories channel. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Our story today is The Cowboy and the Devil Bull, a Ride for Redemption. The Texas sun hung low over the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the land as Caleb Whitaker drove his old pickup into the town of Dusty Creek. The crunch of gravel beneath the tires, the far-off chirping of cicadas, and the scent of worn leather stirred something deep in his chest. It had been years, too many, since he last rode down these roads. The storefront still stood, though time had etched deeper lines into their wood and paint. A few familiar faces turned to look as he passed, some nodding in silence, others staring with that quiet curiosity reserved for ghosts who come back to life. The town felt smaller than he remembered, like it had shrunk in his absence. Maybe it wasn't the town, maybe it was him. He'd seen too much, slept under too many desert skies, driven cattle across too many dusty trails. But no matter how far he rode, this place clung to his soul like a scar. He carried it in his blood, stitched into his bones. No amount of distance could silence the voice of home calling from deep within. His boots led the way as he walked, almost without thinking, past Hank's old saloon where his father once spun tales with the ranch hands, and the corner store Miss Elsie used to run, where Caleb fetched groceries as a kid. The ghosts of the past walked with him, their shadows flickering at the edge of his memory. And then he heard it, a scratchy voice booming from a loudspeaker. "Step right up, folks! The rodeo's back in Dusty Creek. Get ready to see the toughest cowboys and the meanest bulls this side of the Red River." Caleb stopped cold. The rodeo. A traveling event, just like the one all those years ago. His fingers curled into fists at his sides as old memories pushed to the surface. The roar of the crowd. The scent of sweat and sawdust. The image of his father, tall, unbreakable, standing in the arena. And then, the moment everything shattered. The fall. The silence. The world collapsing. He could walk away. Leave it all buried. But something inside him held him still. His boots felt rooted to the ground, his pulse pounding like hooves against dirt. The rodeo had already taken everything from him once. And now, standing there with the flags flapping in the evening breeze, he wondered if it had something to give back. A group of cowboys walked by, laughing, their hats tilted with swagger. Their voices carried the confidence Caleb used to have, before life carved lessons into his skin. And amid the chatter, the announcer's voice rang out again, sharper now, like a challenge. "Think you've got what it takes? Side-ups open now. Show us what you're made of." His heart thudded. Who did he need to prove something to? The townsfolk who remembered Jack Whitaker's name? The shadows that haunted his dreams? Or maybe himself? He clenched his jaw. Caleb Whitaker wasn't a boy anymore. He wasn't chasing memories. He was a cowboy, just like his father. Maybe it was finally time to stop running. Maybe it was time to face it all. He took a deep breath, letting the dust and history fill his lungs. And then he started walking, straight toward the registration tent. Caleb stood at the edge of the rodeo grounds, boots planted firm in the dirt, but his mind was somewhere else. 8 years in the past, high in the bleachers of this very arena. He'd only been a boy then, just tall enough to grip the wooden rails and watch his father prepare for the ride that would define him. Jack Whitaker wasn't just a cowboy, he was legend. The kind of man folks tell stories about around bonfires long after the fire's gone cold. He didn't know fear. He didn't hesitate. He was raw, untamed skill, the type that stamped its name into the land itself. And Caleb wanted nothing more than to be just like him. He could still hear the roar of the crowd, the thunder of applause as Jack stepped into the ring, tipping his hat to the people who saw him as some sort of saint of the plains. Caleb's eyes were wide, watching as his father climbed onto a beast no man had ever ridden, Black Thunder. Even the name was enough to chill a man's bones. A bull as dark as a stormy night, with burning coal eyes, and a fury born in the pits of hell. No rider had lasted 8 seconds on him. Most didn't last 4. And then it happened. Caleb could still see it. The gate flew open, and time seemed to slow. Black Thunder didn't buck, he detonated. He twisted, spun, kicked like a machine built for destruction. Caleb held his breath, knuckles white as he gripped the fence. His father was strong, the best there was. But even legends have limits. A savage twist, unnatural and violent, and Jack Whitaker was airborne. The impact was brutal. His body slammed into the earth, unmoving, as the bull's hooves crashed down like sledgehammers. The announcer's voice cracked mid-sentence. The cheers of the crowd were swallowed by a horrifying silence. Caleb stood, screaming for his father, shoving through the crowd. He saw the hat lying in the dirt. He saw the dust settle like the last breath of a dying man. Someone grabbed him, held him back, but he fought, begged, hoping it was all some kind of nightmare. It wasn't. Jack Whitaker died that night. And with him, the dreams Caleb had once carried into that arena. The rodeo had stolen his father, his hero, his everything. And yet, there he stood, on the same dirt, hearing the same crowd, walking straight into what he had once sworn he'd never touch again. The weight of his father's legacy sat heavy on his chest, like a ghost refusing to let go. He knew what people would say. "There goes Jack's boy. Let's see if he's got the same grit." But Caleb wasn't there for them. He wasn't chasing a spotlight. He was chasing sleep, peace, an end to the nightmare that followed him since he was 10. The flags flapped above him in the dry afternoon wind. The scent of leather and sweat filled the air. He could turn around. He could go back to the quiet life he'd built far from Dusty Creek. But that would be a lie. This moment had been waiting for him. And now, he was finally ready. With the taste of dust and memory thick on his tongue, he stepped forward, toward the registration tent, toward the past, and into the storm. Caleb had barely crossed the rodeo grounds when a sharp voice cut through the air behind him. "You're not actually going through with this, are you, Whitaker?" He turned. There she was, Maggie Ray, hands on her hips, eyes narrowed like she could see right through him. She hadn't changed much. Still carried that fire in her gaze, still walked like she belonged in a world full of men who underestimated her. Right now, though, she looked downright furious. "Well, it's good to see you too, Maggie," Caleb said, touching the brim of his hat with a crooked smile. Before he could finish, she stormed forward and jabbed a finger into his chest. "You signed up for the bull ride, didn't you?" He let out a long breath. "Yeah, I did." Maggie exhaled hard, shaking her head in disbelief. Damn it, Caleb! Do you even know what you're stepping into? Before he could answer, a heavy boot step echoed behind them. Caleb didn't need to turn around to know who it was. That step carried weight, years of wisdom and wear. Walt Henderson. The old cowboy had run more rodeos than most folks had seen hot meals. His face was weathered like saddle leather, eyes sharp with the kind of truth you couldn't fake. Son! Walt's voice rumbled low, like gravel dragged by steel. He held the clipboard Caleb had just signed. His eyes scanned the name, then locked on Caleb's face. You don't know what you just did. Caleb didn't flinch. I think I do. Walt let out a breath through his nose, glanced at Maggie, who looked about ready to slap some sense into him, then rubbed his jaw with a calloused hand. That bull's still out there, and you just called his name. Silence fell between them, thick as summer heat. Caleb felt it press against his ribs, but didn't move an inch. Black Thunder. Of course it was him. Maybe fate was cruel. Or maybe it had always been heading toward this. Maggie looked from Walt to Caleb. She clenched her jaw. You can still back out, she said, her voice lower now, gentler. You don't have to do this. Caleb looked her in the eyes. And for a flicker of a second, something sparked in his chest, something that made him want to believe she was right. But he couldn't. This wasn't about quitting. It was about finishing what started 8 years ago. He adjusted his hat, exhaled slowly, and nodded toward Walt. Tell me when I ride. Night had fallen over Dusty Creek, and the air smelled of dust and hay as Caleb walked toward the back of the rodeo grounds. The noise of the cowboys behind him faded with every step, replaced by the deeper, primal sounds of the bulls shifting in their pens, hooves scraping dirt, heavy breathing echoing from flared nostrils. He didn't know exactly why he was headed there. He just knew he had to see it with his own eyes. He moved past the holding pens, glancing at the other bulls. Most of them barely noticed him. A few chewed slowly, half asleep in the shadows. Others pawed the ground, restless but unfocused. Then he saw it. A separate pen, set back from the rest, reinforced with thick wooden beams and steel chains cinched tight around the gate. As soon as Caleb laid eyes on him, the breath caught in his chest. Black Thunder. The bull didn't move. His massive body stood still under the dim glow of the floodlights. His hide was darker than a moonless night, and his eyes burned with a fire that seemed almost human. He didn't snort, didn't twitch. He just stared. And for a second, Caleb could have sworn the beast recognized him. The ground vibrated beneath his boots as Black Thunder suddenly exhaled, a thunderous breath that rumbled like the start of a storm. Then, without warning, the bull slammed into the gate, hard. The chains rattled, the wood groaned. But Caleb didn't budge. His heart pounded in his ears, but his boots stayed planted. Mean bastard, ain't he? A raspy voice behind him. Walt Henderson. Caleb didn't turn. He kept his eyes locked on the bull. He's bigger than I remembered, Caleb said. Walt stepped up beside him, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the beast. That bull's broken more men than I care to count, Walt said, his voice low. Your daddy was the best rider I ever saw. And even he couldn't hang on. He sighed, something between warning and regret weighing his words. You sure about this, son? Caleb clenched his jaw. I don't have a choice. Walt nodded slowly, like he already knew that would be the answer. Then I guess we'll see what you're made of tomorrow. With that, Walt turned and walked away, leaving Caleb alone in front of the monster. Black Thunder let out another sharp breath, vapor curling from his nostrils. His muscles tensed beneath his slick hide, coiled and ready to explode. Caleb exhaled. Tomorrow, he'd be on that bull's back. And there'd be no turning back. Morning came slow, heavy like a storm crawling over the plains. The first light had barely crept over the Texas hills when Caleb Whitaker sat alone in the locker room, wrapping his wrists with steady, practiced hands. The leather of his gloves was worn but familiar. The weight of his chaps grounded him. He'd done this before, plenty of times. But today was different. Today wasn't about prize money. It wasn't about a buckle. Outside, the rodeo grounds were waking up. Cowboys murmured around the gates. The clinking of spurs on wood echoed down the alley. Somewhere close, a saddle squeaked as it was tightened. It was all familiar, almost comforting. But under that comfort, something darker churned. This ride wasn't like the others. Caleb inhaled deeply. He could hear the announcer warming up over the PA system, the low hum of the crowd finding their seats. Showtime was close. The door creaked open. Maggie Ray stepped inside. No smirk on her lips. No sass in her stance. Just quiet concern written all over her face. "Tell me this isn't about revenge," she said gently, walking up to him. Caleb didn't answer right away. He tightened his glove, flexed his fingers, then met her eyes. "It's not," he said. But they both knew that was a lie. Maggie rubbed the back of her neck, frustration simmering beneath her worry. "Caleb, you don't have to do this." He gave a half smile and pushed his hat back on his head. "That's the second time you've said that. And it won't be the last if you don't start listening," she snapped, then softened. "This isn't just another bull, Caleb. It's Black Thunder. You know what he's done. Hell, you more than anyone know what he's capable of." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I have to ride him, Maggie. You know that." The silence between them grew thick with everything they didn't say. Finally, Maggie let out a slow breath and spoke again, softer now. "Then promise me this. If you feel yourself slipping, if he starts to get the best of you, let go. Don't let that thing take you too." Caleb held her gaze. Behind her words, he saw it, real fear. She didn't want to lose him. He gave her a nod. "I'll be fine." It wasn't a promise. Just something to ease her heart. Before she could reply, the loudspeakers erupted across the arena. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, the ride of the night. Put your hands together for Caleb Whitaker, stepping up to face the undefeated legend, Black Thunder." The crowd exploded in cheers, thousands of voices rising into a single roar. Maggie exhaled slowly. "I'll be watching." Caleb nodded, pulled his hat down over his eyes, and stood. The walk to the chute felt longer than it should have. Each step felt heavier, like he was dragging every ghost he'd ever known behind him. Cowboys near the gate stepped aside, their faces a mix of respect and quiet worry. Then he saw Walt Henderson, standing near the chute, arms crossed, unreadable as always. "Last chance to back out, Whitaker," Walt said, voice low. Caleb climbed the rail, one boot hooked on the wood. "There's no backing out now." Walt exhaled through his nose and gave a single nod. "Then give him a ride they'll never forget." Caleb settled into the saddle. Black Thunder waited, breathing, staring, steaming. Up close, the bull was massive, sweat gleaming off his hide, muscles twitching beneath the surface like a coiled storm. Caleb's fingers gripped the rope. 8 seconds. That's all it would take. The gate opened. And the world exploded. The chute burst open like a cannon shot, and Black Thunder launched into the arena with all the fury of a twister tearing across the plains. Caleb barely had time to draw a full breath before the bull twisted hard to the left, then snapped back right, muscles rippling with pure rage. The ground disappeared beneath him. The air turned to dust and chaos. He gritted his teeth, his free hand slicing the wind, his grip burning. 1 second. Black Thunder rose into the air, hooves kicking the sky before crashing down like thunder rolling across the land. Caleb felt the impact rattle through his spine. But he held. Eyes locked forward, heart pounding like war drums. 2 seconds. The bull spun again, a violent corkscrew turn that sent the world sideways. Caleb's vision blurred. His core screamed. But he stayed centered. He had to. 3 seconds. Black Thunder surged forward, then bucked high, front legs punching forward, back legs shooting skyward like pistons. Caleb's body lifted with the motion. Gravity yanked hard. His fingers screamed, but he didn't let go. Not yet. Not when the memory of his father was seared so deep in his bones. For seconds, the beast below him snorted fire. Each twist, each slam, was meant to break him, to remind him that this wasn't a game. This was a battle. The arena spun in a dust storm of noise and power. But Caleb heard nothing except the sound of his breath and his heartbeat. 5 seconds. A brutal spin threw him sideways. His shoulder wrenched. Pain shot down his arm. His hat flew off, lost in the blur. His teeth clenched so hard it felt like they might crack. 6 seconds. Another slam. Another violent buck. His legs ached, his chest burned. His grip faltered for just a blink. But he caught it. Barely. Every inch of him was fighting not to let go. 7 seconds. The final spin came like a death roll. Unnatural, ruthless. Caleb's stomach turned inside out. His vision darkened at the edges. He could feel it, the beast trying to rip him off, throw him to the ground, erase him like every other man who dared. He leaned in, teeth bared. 8 seconds. The buzzer blared. In that instant, he let go. Not from weakness. From choice. He tucked and rolled, hitting the dirt like a sack of bricks. The ground knocked the breath clean from his lungs. Pain screamed through his ribs. His limbs ached. But he was alive. He lay there for a moment, staring at the night sky. He had done it. He had ridden the devil. And somewhere, through the roar of the crowd, through the ache in every muscle and bone, he thought he heard his father's voice. Or maybe it was just the wind. Caleb lay flat on his back, chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. The roar of the crowd surrounded him like a wave, but it felt distant, like he was floating just outside his own body. Every muscle screamed. Every bone throbbed. But underneath all the pain was something deeper. Something he couldn't name. A shadow dropped into view. Maggie Ray. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands brushing dust from his face, her eyes wide with panic and relief. "Caleb?" she said, her voice sharp, urgent, but soft at the edges. He turned his head toward her, blinking away the haze. A crooked smile formed on his lips. "Told you I'd be fine," he whispered. Maggie exhaled, half a laugh, half a curse. "You damn fool," she muttered, shaking her head. But Caleb saw it. Her hands were trembling. Her eyes glassy. She'd been scared. Really scared. And maybe she wasn't the only one who had been. A second pair of boots stepped into view. Walt Henderson. He didn't say much. He never did. Just stood there, arms folded, hat pulled low. Caleb looked up at him, waiting. Walt gave the slightest nod. Just enough to mean something. "Your old man would be proud," he said, voice gravel thick and low. That hit harder than any hoofed black thunder could have landed. Caleb swallowed the lump in his throat and sat up slowly, ribs protesting with every inch. "Yeah?" he asked, voice quiet. Walt didn't answer right away. Then, with the calm of a man who'd seen too many nights like this, he reached down a hand. "Yeah." Caleb took it. As Walt pulled him to his feet, the arena exploded in applause. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, declaring Caleb Whitaker the man who had finally conquered the unbeaten legend, Black Thunder. Cowboys clapped him on the back. Hats were raised in respect. He had done what no one else could. He'd made history. And yet, something felt off. The cheers rang out around him. The crowd chanted his name. But it all felt hollow. He looked toward the stands, to the one place his father used to sit. Empty now. Always would be. Maggie came up beside him, her voice gentler this time. "Caleb?" He blinked, clearing the haze of pain and memory, and forced a smile. "I'm good," he said. A lie, but one he needed to say, for now. The crowd kept cheering, kept shouting his name. But standing there under the rodeo lights, with dust rising like smoke around him, Caleb Whitaker couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. By the next morning, Dusty Creek was buzzing. Every diner, every bar, every front porch had one name on their lips. Caleb Whitaker. The man who tamed Black Thunder. It was in the papers. On the radio. Kids were reenacting his ride in the streets. Rodeo scouts called before breakfast. Sponsors offered money that could buy a whole ranch. It was all happening fast. Too fast. But Caleb? He wasn't celebrating. He sat alone by the stables, cigarette burning between his fingers, watching the horses shift in the morning light. He should have felt proud, triumphant. But all he felt was hollow. His dad had been here once. Signed contracts. Won buckles. He was the man whose name made the stands roar. And now Caleb stood in that same shadow. Still. The silence was broken by the sound of familiar boots crunching dry dirt. Maggie Ray. She folded her arms as she approached, a slight smirk dancing at the corner of her mouth. "So what's next for the great Caleb Whitaker?" she asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. He took one last drag and flicked the cigarette into the dirt. "That's the question, ain't it?" Maggie looked at the pile of offers next to him. Contracts, endorsement deals, flashy promises in bold print. "You don't have to do any of it," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" She nodded at the papers. "Chase something that doesn't belong to you. You did it, Caleb. You faced your demon. But if you're looking for peace and all that," she nudged the contracts with her boot, "you won't find it here." Caleb didn't reply. He leaned back against the fence, eyes drifting toward the wide Texas sky. Last night in the arena, he thought he heard his father's voice. Maybe it was just wind. Or maybe Jack Whitaker really had been watching. "Did you see me, old man?" Caleb whispered. The words hung in the air, unanswered. Maggie gently elbowed him. "You know, there's more to life than chasing ghosts." Caleb smirked sideways. "Says the girl who shows up like one." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide her smile. "You coming to breakfast or what?" He hesitated, eyes flicking back to the pile of promises at his feet. Then he looked at Maggie. Maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't about what came next. Maybe it was about what you chose to leave behind. He stood up, stretching his battered frame, and gave the sky one last glance. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. The months that followed should have been the peak of Caleb Whitaker's life. His name was everywhere. People he'd never met slapped him on the back, bought him drinks, called him a legend. "You're the man who rode Black Thunder," they'd say, eyes wide like they were staring at a ghost. And maybe they were. Caleb rode a few more bulls. Signed a couple of big deals. Let the fame follow him like an extra shadow. But it never filled the hollow space inside. The cheers faded too fast. The trophies gathered dust. And when the arena lights went out, he still felt like that boy on the rail, waiting for his father to stand back up. One evening, Caleb found himself standing by a quiet pasture on the edge of Dusty Creek. The sun was low, painting the land in warm gold. And of course, Maggie Ray found him. She always did. "Knew I'd find you here," she said, leaning against the fence beside him. Caleb shook his head with a smile. What, you got a tracker on me or something? She shrugged. Not hard. You're always running from something. He sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. I'm not running, he muttered. I'm just trying to make sense of it all. Maggie watched him for a beat. Then, voice softer than usual, she asked, Have you? Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked out over the pasture, where the grass swayed like waves and the sky burned with the last light of day. He'd spent years chasing a ghost, trying to prove something to a man who wasn't there to see it. But maybe Maggie was right. Maybe it wasn't about chasing. Maybe it was time to start building something new. The next morning, Caleb walked into the old rodeo barn. Inside, a handful of young cowboys were warming up, some barely old enough to shave, others already carrying scars from hard lessons. They stopped when they saw him. They knew who he was. He took off his hat, set it on a post, crossed his arms, and nodded to one of the boys tightening a glove. Let's see what you got. That was the beginning of something different. Something his father never got to do. Caleb Whitaker kept riding, kept carrying the name. But he wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. He was helping the next generation carve their own names into the dirt. And one day, as he watched a lanky teenager climb into the chute and nod for the gate, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. Some cowboys ride for the thrill, some for the glory. But Caleb Whitaker rode for something deeper. Something no trophy, no buckle, no paycheck could ever replace. He didn't walk into that arena to prove he was the best. He walked in to face the ghost that had followed him since the age of 10. To ride not just a bull, but the pain of losing a father. The silence left behind. The question that had burned in his chest for years. Was I enough? Conquering Black Thunder didn't bring Jack Whitaker back. It didn't fill the empty seat in the bleachers. It didn't erase the nights Caleb spent staring at ceilings, haunted by what could have been. But it gave him something else. It gave him closure. It gave him a choice. To stop running from the past and start shaping the future. He didn't ride into legend because he beat the unbeatable. He became a legend because when the dust settled, he stayed, he taught, he listened. He showed a new generation of riders that strength isn't just holding on for 8 seconds. It's knowing when to let go and when to start again. Caleb Whitaker didn't just survive the Devil Bull. He outlived his own ghosts. And in the quiet spaces of Dusty Creek, where the wind carries stories across the land, his name now rides with them. Not as a son trying to live up to a legacy, but as a man who carved his own into the earth. We have reached the end of our story. Leave your like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.